Welcome to Prime Suspects for your weekly insider's look behind the counter of Prime Sports. Alongside Joe Brennan Jr. and Adam Bjorn, I'm your host, Matt Landis. This week's topics: the NFL weekend that was for Prime, a growing chorus of concern around the current state of legalized sports gambling, and the Major League Baseball Players Association taking some sportsbooks to court. Guys, kicking it off, as always, with the latest from inside Prime Sports. Chaos continues to reign supreme across the NFL in Week 3. Joe, we'll kick it off with you. Which games did you sweat this past weekend, and how were the results for the book?
I mean, again, because of the mix that we have right now, we seem to have a higher percentage of sharp players versus Joes on the street. So just like, for instance, using last night as an example, we needed the Bills slightly for that game, and boy, did they really deliver. It's interesting to be sitting there and your sweat is with the favorite. That's definitely been, I think, the most interesting part here the last couple of weeks.
Adam, what did you see on the trading floor over the course of Week 3 in the NFL, and how might that inform your approach for Week 4 and beyond?
Well, I mean, this week we went into Sunday, early games. There was two big losses. The Titans was a loser. Cardinals were a loser. But the Vikings were a big win, and the Steelers as well. Chargers-Steelers game was one of the biggest bet games, along with the Titans-Packers game, which oddly enough was another one. I saw the biggest action. Good two-way action, but again, one was a winner, one was a loser. And then needed Seattle in the late games, but generally there wasn't much else looking at it. And then one of the big ones was Sunday night with KC. Got really reamed well there with one player needing Atlanta. KC getting up at the end really hurt and sort of took a bit of a shine off Sunday's results. But again, beat New Jersey, lost Ohio. So it's just the way things are rolling at the moment and looking into it. And then, as Joe said, there wasn't much substantial last night, except for the fact that I am now dead in the Circa Survivor. Bengals taking me out again. So they've taken out more than half my entries from Week 1 and Week 3. And I mean, just carnage. I enjoyed the carnage. I didn't pick anything Sunday. I was happy Sunday night, no matter what happened. Saw it coming a mile away.
Yeah, I lucked out going with the Jets on Thursday. Had no idea what landmines I was avoiding all weekend long. But if this gets much more interesting, we might have to talk a bit of Circa Survivor here. But as things stand, Adam, before we move on, I did want to follow up with you on that Chargers-Steelers game. You mentioned that being a big result for the book, some two-way action. To maybe make this a bit forward-looking for any bettors listening, how much of that was just because of different opinions that different bettors had on the game, and how much of it could have been injury-related, especially with Justin Herbert news evolving over the course of the week? Maybe something bettors want to consider, injury news playing a big role in betting decisions later on in a weekly NFL betting cycle.
Well, Pittsburgh was definitely a bigger result earlier in the week. It was all Chargers money early, and then the Pittsburgh money come late, and then it was Chargers again right at the end. So again, depending that, the news always has some effect. And then sometimes there's an over move and that by the market, so you get players coming back the other way. But that game definitely popped up at 3 at some periods of time and then went back to 2.5, I think after opening like 1.5 a Sunday night on Monday. So that one did have a bit of a movement. And again, had it landed 3, I don't think there would have been any damage. If it had landed 2, it might have gotten ugly, but, how many games are landing on that? So it was just part of, again, taking the bets, moving it, getting into a position. And again, I did see 3 peak up Sunday morning, and then it was back to 2.5 pretty quickly.
All right, well, from the NFL to the betting industry as a whole, our water cooler segment this week, guys, on a Twitter thread with more than 1 million views, renowned NBA bettor Bob Voulgaris, also known as Haralabob, proclaims the ills of gambling as someone who built his career on it. And his post begins with, quote, "Legalized sports betting as it currently stands will devastate America in a similar fashion to the opioid epidemic," unquote. He recommends 3 changes as a bare minimum: 1, restrict ads; 2, ban credit card deposits; and 3, protect vulnerable bettors. Adam, we'll start with you for this segment. What do you think of these suggested changes, and would you make any others?
Well, if he thinks sports betting's bad, wait till the iGaming arrives. Like, they have no idea that this sports betting thing that they've created is a drop in the bucket. And I think there's massive overreactions because it's the thing there right now in front of them. As for the second guy that jumped on, Andrew Yang or something, naive and clueless. Again, just completely out of the picture, understanding what it is. For Voulgaris, I mean, I noted he make the note at being hypocritical at the end of it. No, I think he was just being observant. For a long time, I've been saying that they should remove the ads. Again, selfishly, levels the playing field. Credit cards, I've been in the credit business for many years over the time, and credit cards is obviously different because it's tied to rates and high percentages and that to pay back. No issue banning them or canceling them. I think if you have funds, there's many ways to make deposits these days, and no issue on that one. The third one, and this is where I get all the responsible gaming stuff and that, and I'll play the, yes, we should be responsible. They're adults for me. These people are adults. I know that, and Joe will go into this a lot better than I ever will, of, people that have issues and the percentages and all those kind of things. And I think a lot of these other operators, especially we know the European background of being very predatory in the way that they do things. And we're seeing fines thrown all across the world and people wanting their money back and court cases and all this stuff. But for me, at the end of the day, if you're an adult, you sign up, you go through the process, you go through the KYC, you go through, I'm sorry, but that's just the game. I mean, that's just what it is. So I'll let Joe go into more of responsible gaming and being the clean cut guy of diving into what that should be. But it was a good post. Again, not hypocritical from someone that's made their sports, living in a sports betting, as I have. It's been popping up the last few months about some of these kind of topics of us in the space and what we're doing to people and, the industry and that civilization and bringing it down. Horseshit, in my opinion, but it's just part of the two sides of the coin.
And Joe, we'll get to the Andrew Yang bit in a moment as well. But with regard to Haralabob's comments, what do you make of them, and how much weight, if any, do you give to the source being somebody who's profited handsomely from betting?
Look, Bob, I don't know Bob personally, but obviously know his reputation from over the years. I think Bob's actually an interesting example for people and how you can take a betting background and grow beyond it, with his work in sports analytics. He's a guy like Ted Knudsen, who came out of Pinnacle and then with his company StatsBomb became a real force in analytics for soccer. So I think he's interesting in that regard. The 3 points that he listed, honestly, wouldn't be all that different from things that I've said in the past or that I'd agree with, to the point of, frankly, being obvious. Like, don't target people who are vulnerable. And, the credit card thing is, that's probably on point. Credit cards is one of the smallest methods that we use for payments. The players that we deal with, they don't use them. So we could be done with credit cards tomorrow and it wouldn't mean anything to our business. I think where Bob kind of derails himself was with his opening and trying to compare this to something like the opioid crisis. And, there's nothing that undercuts a rational argument more than an irrational comment. And I just had the opportunity to go to a family wedding in the Deep South, and it just happened to be in a town that was, it's been very hard hit. The local economy is really tough. There's a lot of poverty. And as a result, there's a lot of opioid addiction, fentanyl, all those things. And I'll tell you, like, driving around it, kind of like the former downtown of this town, and seeing people walking around in the state, like they were walking around in a state of drug withdrawal or in the middle of drug use. They weren't affected by a 5-pick SGP. So I do think it's kind of horseshit to try and make that kind of case. To me, it seems like either Bob was just trying to be clever, or if he really thinks that, I think Bob ought to get out of his goddamn house and go see what the opioid epidemic really affects, because it's gambling. Yeah, we have to take it seriously. We have to protect the people who are negatively affected by it. But comparing it to something like that, which is like a major health crisis in the country, is just really horseshit and undercuts the rational stuff that I would largely agree with in the middle of his statement. As far as Andrew Yang getting involved in this, to me, is another tourist. There's an awful lot of tourists right now making their way through the industry to chip in their 5 cents about what they think about. And a lot of it they base on, the high level comments, the high level synopsis of some of these studies that are being done. Now, I'm going to say at the outset, I'm not the American Tobacco Institute guy who's going to tell you that nobody's ever negatively affected by gambling. People are. There are people who are addicts, but it's part of a whole portfolio of comorbidities. They're not only gambling addicts, but they are drug addicts and they are alcoholics and they're addicted to other things. And we need a serious conversation about addiction in the country and not continue to try and find the little red demon inside of substances. It's inside of people, okay? I think all of us know somebody in our life who is an addict, who's been affected by addiction, and it trivializes their suffering to say, it's inside of this thing. If we just get rid of this thing, they'll be okay. We know that's not true, okay? And so these little touristy drive-by studies that are done at such a high level, and they're correlation without causation studies. It's just, the industry in large part has brought it on itself with the saturation bombing of the advertising, being in everybody's face. The industry has by and large made itself an easy target with this stuff. So it's very easy for people to be tourists and get a big headline with what are admittedly, when I get down into the methodologies, pretty faulty studies. Okay. But arguing back against it is like I said at the outset, it's like being from the American Tobacco Institute and trying to argue that cigarettes don't cause lung cancer. They do. Okay. But in how many people it causes lung cancer is usually dramatically lower than whatever. I'm not going to get into that because cigarettes killed most of my family before I was 6 years old. So let's stop. If we want to have a serious conversation to assess how many people have been affected by the legalization of the industry. Let's remember this also. And maybe Haralabab ought to step up on this one. Legalization happened. All that means is the illegal industry that he was betting into beforehand, where he made his nut, is now illegal. What does that mean? That means there's more opportunity for people to get help or be identified as problem gamblers. Okay. When it was just the gray market and the black market, your local PPH bookie and the offshore guys were not giving you problem gambler information. So by legalizing it, again, this is the not pretty part of it, but this is something that we said it would give us the opportunity to identify people who have problems and get them help. So let's remember that part of it as well. That's the end of my TED Talk.
This week's TED Talk from Joe Brennan Jr. And Joe, I do have a related thought to get back to there. First, I want to zoom out just in case anybody listening to this may not have caught Andrew Yang's comments previously. So the former presidential candidate took to Twitter to share a link to an Atlantic article titled "Legalized Sports Gambling Was a Huge Mistake." And Yang's words before sharing the link were, quote, "Legalized sports betting leads to more personal bankruptcies, reduced savings, and increased abuse in the states that have allowed it. I wish it were otherwise, but the data is striking." And my first thought was that responsible gaming, no laughing matter. Collectively, we can and should do better. But a quick second thought was that the data we don't have for unregulated markets may paint an even darker picture. So Joe, if you want to jump back in on that, or Adam, if you want to weigh in on this topic, take this as a jump ball, guys. I'm just wondering if this may be a case of better the devil you know than the devil you don't.
I think Joe caught it at the end of what he just said. Like, the whole point of this was legalize, regulate it, make it less stigma, etc. But he missed the key point. Maybe more bankruptcies, but less broken legs. So, you can now deposit directly, you can get your money out. Like, again, the whole point of this, 20 plus years ago, when I first moved to this side of the world and they were invading somewhere, Iraq or something like this, one of the comments I was like, why aren't they just legalizing this and taxing this? And 2 decades later, they're doing it. It gives a lot more help by regulating it. Now, have the regulators and legislators got it right? Hell no. But at least they're moving in the right direction. It's the ability to now, pivot and make some changes and things like that. But as Joe said, there was no help. Offshore didn't care about responsible gaming. It didn't exist. This has given more opportunity for bringing it out to the open. Again, the stigma being removed. Yes, there's some issues, but there was issues before it was regulated. There was the same things were happening. People were losing houses and cars and all these kind of things, gambling. It's not any different. But again, sports betting, it isn't the enemy. There's a lot of other things that are gambling wise and things like that have been around forever. Sports betting is such a tiny, tiny, tiny drop in the bucket that they're attacking this incorrectly, in my opinion.
Yeah. And full disclosure about Haralabob is he's also big in crypto. Okay. I don't think anybody wants to have a side-by-side discussion about some of the things about people applying all their money into crypto and losing their ass. So look, it's a world where people who have money make decisions about how they spend their money. Okay. Most people who are betting on sports are betting on average $5 to $10. Okay. That doesn't mean that you don't keep your eye on those people, that you don't try and be a good shepherd. But at the same time, we're now given, this is the backlash, and it was inevitable, and the industry largely invited it upon itself with the high profile that it's created for itself. And I, for one, would welcome that the industry backs off of that there were sensible standards put in place for the marketing and everything, and stop treating sports betting like you're buying Happy Meals. Okay. But at the same time, we're the punching bag du jour. Okay. All sorts of social ills are going to be attributed, but where are all the academics from Brigham Young in that study that Andrew Yang was citing prior to 2018? They couldn't study the market because there was no data on it, but there was a sports betting market. Now, I'm really interested to find out what our former Australian rules football player meant by breaking legs. He looks like he'd be capable of doing it, doesn't he? But no, this is what is going to happen. Whether it is this, whether it is Jante Porter, whether it is, the number of players that have gotten suspended from the professional football leagues, the NCAA athletes that have been suspended or have lost their scholarships, those are all ugly. But those are all the necessary consequence of legalization, because one of the things that we said is increase visibility into this already existing underground economy. We have that. Now we can go to work. We can get people help. We can hold people accountable. We can try and assure the integrity of the games. Absent legalization, Jante Porter would still be playing in the NBA now, wouldn't he? Right? We wouldn't know about these people that Brigham Young are tallying up right now and attributing all sorts of social ills toward. We wouldn't be able to get those people help. So again, don't let perfection be the enemy of the good. And it was a good result with legalization. And as far as Haralabob, whether he's a hypocrite or not, one thing I'll say about that is I have to think that any big player out there at some point probably questions, hey, am I getting into, like, if they go on a bad run or something like that, probably ask themselves, do I have a problem here or not? So I don't fault Bob for talking about this or saying that he's a hypocrite or something like that. He's not. I mean, he's a smart guy and he has a unique view that very few people have in this industry. So I welcome his comments as far as what his recommendations are. I disagree with his comments as far as waving the bloody shirt with his comparison with the opioid crisis.
All right, guys. Well, from the gridiron in our first segment to the thoughts from a legendary hardwood handicapper in our second segment to the diamond for our third segment, the look ahead this week. Per a September 17th article by Jessica Wellman on SBCAmericas.com, the Players Union for Major League Baseball has filed 2 separate lawsuits against 4 different sportsbooks, claiming they're illegally using player likenesses to promote their products. The 4 plaintiffs, DraftKings, Bet365, FanDuel, and Underdog. Of note, DraftKings, Bet365, and FanDuel have partnerships with both Major League Baseball and with individual teams. The issue here, the use of player images in apps, marketing materials, and social media posts featuring individual player props. More broadly, this comes 2 weeks after the NFL also took DraftKings to court over a similar issue. Joe, how serious do you think these lawsuits are? And do you think they might foreshadow any changes to the relationship between leagues and operators in the future?
Oddly enough, I think we're just the sports betting industry is really a third party to an ongoing battle. And that's between the players' unions and the leagues, simply because, like, okay, who controls the rights over what? And this is an ongoing part of the collective bargaining agreements that the leagues have periodically. So since, for instance, that we use the official data feed of the NFL through Genius Sports, which gives us a right to use their logos and other things that are supposed to be really great. It's where do you draw the line? When do we own, or when do we have the ability to use imagery? Is a specific player using their image, is that the property of the league, or is that the property of the player? That has not been solved. The leagues will tell you, you hear at the end of any NFL broadcasts, the rights of this broadcast are solely the rights of the NFL. Well, it's not like the NFL and the NFL Players Association. So the fact that these lawsuits are happening right now, I think setting the table for the next round of collective bargaining agreements between the big pro leagues and the players unions, and trying to stake out their territory.
Adam, I'm afraid you might call this one a nothing sandwich, as I recall you doing with certain topics on this show in the past. That said, I'm hoping you'll have a strong take here to take us home on a high note.
No, I actually wrote down no opinion, don't care. But yeah, generally, I mean, when you go through all these contracts with the providers, and they sell it like this, you say, well, I don't need any of this added crap. Just I need the data, play-by-play, stuff like that. And you get the logos, don't care. One thing that I've had a rule to our web dev team for 20 plus years from all the companies I've consulted for and whatnot is do not use official players, NFL, cricket, AFL, rugby league, any of these things on the UI. It just opens up issues, the copyrights, the trademarks, all those kind of things. Just something that I've never touched, never been interested in. And again, you don't know what the players' beliefs are and whatnot. They don't necessarily want to be, their face plastered all over betting sites. And the other aspect of it is what Joe sort of said. It's the leagues and the player unions that have been in wars for a very long time. I'm sure there was days back before I even knew these sports where there was time taken off because the unions and the players and the leagues couldn't get together. So yeah, nothing sandwiched this one for me, but it's just part and parcel of those other inner wars of what's going on. I mean, the last thing I will add is these leagues and these third-party data providers are just making this industry way too expensive for anyone but the top few to survive. I think this is a topic that we'll get into going forward as well in a bit more depth as maybe its own segment. But now these leagues, they're asking for, one of the things that needs to be removed from the sports betting in the US to compete with offshore is the excise tax, where you're paying, the 0.25% of every dollar that comes through the door. Well, now you've got the NBA and the NFL and that all wanting a piece of that percentage. Again, they don't understand the business enough. They don't get together with understanding what they should put in these contracts and how they should tackle these contracts. They're just getting in bed with people that are telling them, we'll give you $100 million in equity in a company that's going to be racing to the bottom eventually between the two or three that are out there. So this is just another inside fight within all these pieces that exist in this industry when they should be just opening up this data to whoever wants to build the tools, because ultimately they're losing viewership, they're losing attendance, and they need to build their product by just giving the shit away. That doesn't matter on the bottom line. So this is just another thing again. Players, you have to respect whatever their beliefs are and they don't want to be part of this. But this is an inside fight between the players and the leagues.
Yeah, just to pick up briefly on something that Adam said, and that is the amount of fee seeking that we see. And it's not only from the official data providers, but it's everything that we have on our side of the ball. It's everything from the geolocation and KYC services, official data, things like that. There's other things that get packed into this that lawmakers are sold on, like, well, you need mandatory third-party integrity services, or there's a couple others that are going to be coming down the pike, where state lawmakers are being convinced and regulators are being convinced that, like, oh, well, you need these third-party requirements to look into, like, problem gaming triggers and all those things like that. And they're all just really looking to get a percentage. They're all looking to take their cut of it. And it's because, and this is, again, the fall of the industry. The industry sold itself after PASPA was overturned. The industry largely sold itself based on its handle number. So people think that there is just these vast oceans of liquidity out there. And they're like, what's a couple of percentage points here, or a tenth of a percentage point there, or like whatever it may be. And the fact of the matter is you can talk about prime, the small guys. The big guys can't handle this shit either. They can't handle the slow whittling away of all of this. And it's going to be very difficult for anybody to get to profitability, not just prime, but fan kings as well. If you're going to continue to every time something comes along, whether it's integrity or responsible gaming or official data or any of these things, like, well, we're just going to hang another piece. We're going to clip another percentage point off you guys. Meanwhile, you also now have this current of lawmakers who are like, you know what, 20% gross gaming revenue tax, that's not enough. Let's make it 35. Let's make it 50 or something. In the end, if we keep going this way, you're going to wind up with the lottery having this, because the lottery, you can tack every fee you want onto it. It's a single operator. It's a monopoly. The states run it. They're a vending machine. You're not going to have a dynamic industry that grows, and you're not going to have, I think, well-run industry. But that's going to be the natural result of everybody continuing to try and shave off part of the revenue and charge us like we're fanatics. Fanatics, they'll not make anything off their sports betting business, but the money that they make from their jerseys, hats, all that sale, and the fees that the leagues charge those guys and that they can recover off those guys. They wanted us to be that.
Yeah, one thing you will have is a booming black and gray market.
Yeah. The thing that everybody has to keep in mind, and this is the truth. This is not me campaigning for it, against it. But the truth is a massive sports betting industry, online and mobile, grew up in the United States without any participation from the leagues, no official data, none of these things. Okay. So this moving towards like requiring and taking big cuts and everything like that, this industry has shown that it can grow and operate in the most hostile environments with no participation from other stakeholders in the sports world. So it's not, okay, now it's time to get ours, jump in time. If regulators and lawmakers want this to run well, it's not giving in to every third party that comes and wants their approval to go and take another slice off of the sports books pie. Or else, again, they might as well just pull it all down today and give it over to their state lottery.
All right. Well, right off the bat there, when I tossed it to Adam, I thought the show might be over in a hurry with the words "no opinion," a nothing sandwich indeed. But fast forward a few minutes, some insightful commentary plus follow-up thoughts from Joe that may warrant making this a deeper dive in a segment of its own in the future. So we will chalk that up as a win as we wrap up this week's episode. To the audience, whatever comes of the relationship between leagues and sportsbooks, rest assured, Prime Sports deeply values its relationship with you. Thanks as always for making us a part of your week, and we'll catch you next week right back here on Prime Suspects. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Prime Suspects. Register for Prime Sports at primesports.com and download the Prime Sports app. You can follow us on Twitter at Prime Sportsbook, at Joe Brennan Jr., and at Adam Bjorn 2. You must be 21 or over to play on Prime Sports. Always bet responsibly and within your limits. If you or someone you know has a gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER.